Hi, I'm Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reykdal. Our state's gone through a lot of transformation in the last couple of years, and here at the Office of Superintendent, we've developed a vision that we think will set the framework for the next several decades of learning for our students. It focuses on three critical things that we think all Washingtonian students should be empowered to explore and develop. Post-secondary pathways. So it's really about where they're going and their growth, not that they know some subject on some particular time frame, but rather an understanding of their growth. We want to focus on their career opportunities. So where are they ultimately going? What are they passionate about and how will they get there? And finally, civic engagement, and this is new to our vision. Our students, like all of our community members, have to really engage and work well together. We have to live in a world of civility where we interact even with our differences to create strong communities that are looking out for each other. That's our vision now. We do all of this work through a lens of equity, and what that means for us is every decision, every budget priority, everything we put forward to the legislature, the governor, or our school districts, we think about how it will disproportionately impact students who may not have resources, who may continue to face barriers due to race, or learning disability, or language barrier, or other complications. These notions that we're putting forward, we think are a way to rally everyone in education and policymakers so our education system gets stronger and stronger. I recently sat down with our staff, rather stood on stage, and we reiterated this work. I walked through where we've been and where we are today, from school finance to this idea of every student's ability to learn to where we're going as a state in the future. I invite you to jump in, take a look, watch the video, spend as much or as little time as you want in there, but just know that this office is working really hard as a team with our districts and policymakers to transform our vision of education to be about student growth and student success and equity. Every single child connecting their passion and their dreams with the tools, skills, and learning they need to be successful in life, successful in their careers, and successful in their community. Thanks for taking a look. So welcome everybody and good morning again. It's really neat to have you here. I got reflecting over the last probably 6 months or 5 months as I observed our organization through lots of transformation, and many of you have been here for multiple superintendents, so you knew the cycle of like new team comes in, they're going to change stuff, whatever, ignore them, write them out. It'll all go back to the way it was, and then life will move forward. Maybe that's still true. I observed our organization through lots of transformation, and many of you have been here for multiple superintendents, so you knew the cycle of like new team comes in, they're going to change stuff, whatever, ignore them, write them out. It'll all go back to the way it was, and then life will move forward. Maybe that's still true. New normal. I began to reflect a bit and worked with lots of our data teams here, so a huge thanks to our student information, our finance teams, and lots of you who contribute to some of the presentation work that I get to do. But I thought it would be appropriate to travel the state as I do, several thousand miles a month in the spring and the fall, and observed our organization through lots of transformation, and many of you have been here for multiple superintendents, so you knew the cycle of like new team comes in, they're going to change stuff, whatever, ignore them, write them out. It'll all go back to the way it was, and then life will move forward. Maybe that's still true. It's only through the lens of history where we get to sort of release ourselves from all that difficulty and see the momentum, or sometimes the setbacks, the movement, the distance, the gaps. And I want to expose you to some of that today and the way I sort of think about it, because while every district is different for sure, there are certain observed our organization through lots of transformation, and many of you have been here for multiple superintendents, so you knew the cycle of like new team comes in, they're going to change stuff, whatever, ignore them, write them out. It'll all go back to the way it was, and then life will move forward. Maybe that's still true. So as you're out there and you're interacting with your stakeholder groups and you're trying to create that better excellence for students and staff and administrators and school boards and the diverse roles you have, I truly hope you are grounded in sort of the perspective of where we've been and where we are today. There will be more change, there will be more transformation, but knowing and having a common ground, I hope will allow us to stay focused on our work of closing gaps, our work of student achievement. There's a lot of noise out there, and it's appropriate at times. But it is really local, and it's very, very difficult, in those local environments. I need us to be really stable. I need you to pick up that phone and say, OSPI, how can I help you? Or to be in a district that might have just had tremendous labor tension months ago, and now you're delivering professional development for them, and you got to connect principals and administrators and teachers together. So that's a little bit of what I want to do. We're going to march through this. I really want you to ask questions at the end. I want you to ask the questions you wanted to ask about finance, transformation, gap closing, achievement, whatever we cover, whatever we don't cover. We don't get these moments very often, so I want you to really press a little bit. I'll repeat questions at the end so people can hear it, and we'll march through it. And I hope it's informative, nothing else. Okay, they gave me a green laser pointer. My favorite color is green. I don't know that I'm going to need it, but should I need it, Derek will get it straight in the eye. So that is perfect. Yeah, see, that it does work. Okay, so life after McCleary. You know the case. You know it's been going on for nearly a decade, and you know it took the better part of 6 or 7 years for the legislature to finally say, let's start spending additional resources on public education. So while the case has been in play for nearly a decade, the massive shift of what's gone on in the way we finance schools and the way we perceive schools as being fully funded or not is really a story of the last 2 or 3 years. Primarily the time that we have spent together has been the big transformation in terms of investment. But I ground us in who we are. All students prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. We changed this, as many of you recall. We're serious about this. It's all students prepared for post-secondary pathways. Many of them will choose a university. Many of them will choose a community college. Many of them will go straight to work or to the military or to apprenticeship programs. It is not our job to presuppose what students need way out there. It is our job to give them a skill set and empower our districts so that they are prepared for their next step. Every student is on a continuum, just like the performance of our schools and our buildings are on a continuum. So we're going to keep shattering this idea that every single student is the same and they will all be at the exact same spot their 18th year of life in May or June on a stage at some high school. It is okay to accept this transition and this pathway work of theirs. We transform. We are totally focused on closing gaps. You've heard me say this just about every time we've spent time together. I see it in your work every day, and I can't thank you enough for it. I see you focused on gap closing. And I sometimes oversimplify this, and I do not mean to. There are lots of student groups that need support, lots of individual families. There are emerging risks to families and performance. But as a general rule of thumb, if we look at our data, we can focus on poverty or resources for families. We can look at race as a meaningful impact, English language learners, so a language barrier, and students with disabilities. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If this state focused on just those 4 student groups, many of them with multiple factors impacting their ability to be successful, but if we focused on them, we would shatter graduation rates and performance rates for any state across the country. That's how acute the situation is for those 17, 18, 19% of students who do not graduate in the traditional 4 years. We look at them regularly. We know who they are. And our buildings and our district leaders are doing a better job knowing who they are and creating interventions earlier, largely because you all have been doing the work for years to get our districts prepared for that. Equity-based policies and supports, and so what we mean by that is we shouldn't think of an idea, a concept, a budget request, a policy, a rule, a whack change, a you name it, without thinking about its impact in terms of equity. Are we creating a more equitable opportunity for students and families to engage our public schools and be successful in our public schools? And I'm going to show you a little bit of, we've won some and lost some here with respect to that notion. Lots of goals that we've set for ourselves. This is just a sample, and I know it's probably a little tough for some of you to see, but we're going to send this to you, by the way, which is why in later parts I'm going to race through some of it. But, raising salaries is not a small deal. Our state was lagging significantly. Some research out of Rutgers suggested our teachers were 30 or 40% behind their peers. And when I say that, it is not their peers compared to Massachusetts or California, Alabama, or Florida. It's, does a teacher with experience and education in this state have the ability to compete for salary with somebody with the exact same experience or the exact same education set, maybe working in the private sector in their region? And that's when you see significant gaps there for educators and whether we can compete for talent. So it is not a small deal, and we'll go through it a little bit later, of just about how much resources have been added to that. We are closing student achievement gaps. We are obviously in a position now to talk about a high school and beyond plan that is all the way in the middle school, really thinking about tailoring learning and tailoring pathways for every individual student. We've done that through 2 pieces of legislation over the last 2 years that this agency and many of you have led on. We have moved the state assessment to the 10th grade to give us those 2 years of planning and our pathway work for students. We've expanded dual language programs, and we intend to do a lot more of that, more on that in a bit. More professional development days now for everybody, not just our certificated staff, but also increasingly our classified school employees or our paraeducators specifically. Not without controversy and not without the need for more resources. But again, if you think about equity, it can't just be the teacher. When many students spend 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 80% of their time with somebody other than a certificated teacher, all of our professionals need to be lifted up. And then obviously a massive statewide finance transformation, which is where I want to spend a little more time here. Okay, so the state spends a lot more money than they used to. I get to comb the data across the country. I say this with tremendous confidence, though it usually takes a couple years for the data to lag from the national groups that follow this stuff. But I think it is very safe to say that no state in the United States of America is growing its investment in K-12 faster than us. That is not a statement that says we are now the highest invested state, but what the growth rate looks like is remarkable. Basically, this state has doubled its funding per student in 7 years. Doubled it in 7 years. No other state can touch that at this point in time. It's such an enormous opportunity for us, again, as we get away from the difficulty that transformation has caused, and we think about what opportunities, if we reimagine and we redesign and we rethink what's possible, would you rather do it at $14,000 or $15,000 a student or $7,000 a student? The possibilities for our districts are enormous, notwithstanding the challenges. But it's been remarkable growth. The blue bar is simply the biennial budget that they just passed. You can see that kind of growth rate. It is stunning. The challenge, we're just getting average. When I first spoke to many of you 2 years ago when I took this office, I said one of my goals, and it seemed kind of nerdy at the time, it's still pretty nerdy as I sort of see it, is I wanted to invest in this state at least as much as the states across the country are on average. And the only way to measure that meaningfully is to look at the private economy or the total economy of a given state and figure out what percentage of that economy gets returned back into their public school system. Gross state product, you hear about that all the time. That's their total economy. Another way to look at it is aggregate income. Is all the income generated in Washington state, how much of that through taxation is returning itself back into the form of public school investments? The national average is 3.5%. The international average is 4% around the globe for most of the countries we compete with. This state was at 2.9% 2 years ago. Truly one of the lowest in the country. And that's not acceptable. Imagine trying to be a starting teacher at $36,000 a year when the average home price in your community is $700,000. Right? Welcome to East King County, or $550,000 in Seattle, or even $400,000 in Clark County, or even $300,000 in Thurston County or Whatcom County. So these investments have been meaningful to attract talent and hopefully at some point to transform the way we think about equity for our students. I am proud to tell you that probably within the next year and a half, even if the legislature adds nothing more, again, the data will lag a bit, we will hit that national average. I thought it would take us 6, 7, 8 years to do this. Maybe I lacked a little faith in legislature 2 years ago. But when you add billions of dollars and inflation is hanging around 1 or 2%, 2.5% a year, you catch up pretty fast. And I do believe that our state, for the first time since we've been looking at the data over 20 years, will exceed or meet the national average in terms of level of investment. You did that. Truthfully, you did that. We know we support a system that's remarkable, but the connection between the work of our districts in classrooms every day, in bus garages, in that resource room, on that playground, the work that they do every day is working with students. It's the work of the legislature that provides this opportunity, and this state has designed a constitutional office to connect those two dots. We tell the story through your advocacy and through your work and through your research and through your data and through your reporting and, yes, through your compliance, which is important. We tell the story of districts, what they need and where they're going and how we can improve outcomes for kids. It is our job to translate that to the legislature. And with all due respect to my 49 other Supts around the country, I have the best staff in the country because they didn't double their investment in 7 years. We did. So, yay, Washington. Congratulations to yourselves. You can give yourselves a round of applause right now. That's very good. This is it in the form of funding per student. Again, this is just a 4-year look. So really, since the legislature's gotten serious about this case, we've basically moved, as you can see right there, from about $9,200, $9,300 to $1,000 a student. It's a remarkable growth rate for us. There are states who invest more in total dollars, and we'll catch them. Massachusetts, we'll get there. But it's a big and stunning growth rate. I show this to you because I just want you to note, maybe this one's better. This is your total line, which has been remarkable. It's a combination of your state and local money, which has grown rapidly, and your federal money, which is declining. It's either flat or declining in some cases, and certainly as a percentage of our budget, it's way down. When I got here 2.5 years ago, it was 10, 11% of all the spending in our state on education was the feds. We're down to 7% now. Again, part of that's the feds not maintaining commitments, and a big part of that is our state is growing its investment so rapidly that it's just drowning out the role of federal dollars. And I want to take a moment right now to really challenge you to think about that. I really want you to think about what that means. How many of you are managing federal dollars with meaningful purpose, Title I dollars or Title II dollars or dollars for students in our native communities or whatever program you run? If the state money is becoming a bigger and bigger share of what we do and our legislature is taking more and more ownership of results, you can expect the accountability system to change over the next year or two. You should expect that school districts will say, why do I do so much paperwork and so much accountability around a shrinking share of my revenue? And they're asking us those hard questions. And so many of you have tried to transform the CPR process and sort of the regulatory side of what we do. And we're going to challenge you over the next year and a half to rethink the structure of all those federal dollars and rethink what it means to be a support organization to districts so that they feel like that phone call they make is more about technical support and advice and counsel and mentorship than it is about, oh gosh, did I spend the money right? Especially when it's only 7% of your budget. It's going to be a bigger question we ask of you over the coming months and in the next year. Quick look at salaries. I just showed you the last graph, growing the state budget at 32% over 4 years. I would note that teacher salaries in that same period of time have grown 29%. So one of the great myths out there is the teachers got all the new money. Not true. Their salaries have grown proportionate to the overall investment that the state has made. Everything has been growing at that remarkable rate. And yes, in the last year, teachers got an average 13% salary increase, the certs, which is more than they got combined in the 3 years prior. So we are catching up to the market. But the one myth bust I need you to do in this area is to say to folks, hey, it's been tough out there and we get it. But teacher compensation in particular is simply keeping up now with the higher levels of investment. But the state adds obligation to districts that makes it hard. They take away local flexible levy dollars, and they've added a new healthcare system, which is sort of partially funded. They add 4 professional development day expectations of our paras, but only fund maybe 1, maybe 2. So districts will legitimately say, yes, I've invested a lot in my teachers, but there are things on my plate that cause me to need to spend additional resources, and those didn't necessarily come proportionate with the new expectations. So you have this simultaneous moment where your state superintendent is in districts saying, hey, we've doubled it in the last 7 years, and we have record funding per student. And they say, man, I'm not feeling that. I know my classroom teacher ended up better off, and in some cases, administrators, and in a few cases, our classified school employees, definitely exceeding inflation, all those groups. And that's important for retention and talent acquisition. But can they sustain that early learning program? Can they keep the para in the classroom? With the health care costs coming their way, can they still afford the business model that they have? Those are the hard things that they're struggling with right now. So there's never been a bigger reason for us to come together and to really focus as an organization on that glue that we are between district need and legislator as resources, and say, okay, you made some remarkable progress, but we got to tweak that a little bit. There's things our districts need. And we'll find the right tone, and it won't be offensive, I hope, but sometimes it'll be a little edgy for the legislature. They need to know that unfunded mandates are real. When you put a $300 million obligation on a system and you give them $100 million, that $200 million comes from somewhere. And so our job is going to be a lot of translation over the next year. Here is a complicated and yet straightforward understanding, if I can walk you through this. This is our districts last year in terms of the salary change that occurred. And I pointed out because we have artificially stuck every district in one of 5 regional categories. These are the districts who got no regionalization, 6%, the 12%, the 18s, and the 24% districts. This is their year-over-year salary change. And so most districts, as you can see, here's the 0 line, almost every district increased salaries. There's a few negatives down here. Truthfully, those are tiny districts, maybe 10 faculty. Some senior faculty member leaves, they hire a newbie, and their average salary goes down. But in no scenario did we find actual salaries across the board went down for anybody. It's a bit of a statistical anomaly here. But look at the pattern here. You have a bunch of districts who got high regionalization, 18 or 24, and it just sort of comes together. Their salaries become really obvious. And you have districts who got no regionalization, in some cases 0% salary increases up to 20 and 30 and bigger. Very big differences out there. And so that tension you feel out there of the system is, oh my gosh, like I gave away 20%. How can I sustain it? And my neighbor only gave away 10, or my neighbor bargained 30%. There's a lot of dissonance out there between what happened in these non-regionalized districts. Mostly rural, but some suburban areas around smaller cities. So your Tumwaters are in this bucket, right? And your rural districts are in this bucket. Your suburban areas around Seattle or Everett or Tacoma are mostly sitting in this area right here. But a very, very logical pattern to how salary increases went out last year. Here's the same thing, flipped only slightly differently. I'm going to show you 2 slides. This is before all this change occurred. This was the last year of salaries in the old world, no regionalization. The legislature was only putting a little bit of new money in. This is high levies. This is the old world where we relied on lots of levies. And again, your 1% districts, this is their actual salary now. It was $72,000 per average teacher. Big spread on the 1.0 districts. They had salaries from, say, $45,000 to $65,000. And then as you got to 6%, 12, 18, 24 districts, these districts right here have this logical stair-step pattern. But remember, that's before they were ever put in regionalized categories. We did that because we want to show the legislature, before you put these districts in these spaces, if we had lumped them in your logic, look at the pattern that emerges. All of this is about local levies. These are wealthier communities, higher property value communities. I'm going to show you now what happened to all of those districts. 1 year later, when the legislature cuts levies in half, but adds a bunch of additional dollars to districts, gets rid of the statewide salary schedule, says it's a free market out there, 295 different contracts, get after it, it's going to be a very local world. So this is before, and here's the after. Exactly the same pattern. Everyone is shifted to the right. The new average teacher salary is $81,000 instead of $72,000. There's still a pretty good spread amongst the districts who got 1.0 or no regionalization. You can see this logical stair-step pattern. I cannot emphasize enough for you all in this room today how important it is that you understand this next point. The legislature added billions of dollars to shore up this system. We are 80+% salaries and benefits. So when you add billions of dollars, it generally goes to compensation. Either more people get hired or the people you have get market rate compensation. That's awesome. What they did not do is focus on student equity. Unless you believe equity is about having a similar opportunity no matter where you live to have a teacher that can afford to live in the community in which they work. If that's your definition of equity, and that is a legit definition, the legislature cut levies, added money, piled it into the wealthiest communities, and they simply replicated the world we used to live in. But instead of local levies and high property value communities being the factor that allowed the teachers to live in these high-cost areas, now the state has codified it. Your state, for the first time in its history, has said it is going to be a practice of the state of Washington to send a lot more money to wealthier communities than to low-income communities. because we want every student to have access to a teacher that can afford to live in the community in which they reside. That is a legitimate definition of equity. But what it is not is more money per kid in the high poverty communities. The highest money per student is now going to the wealthiest communities, and your state has said that is going to be our practice. And your state Supreme Court said, we're good with it. That works for us, case closed. That is a profound moment in our state's history. We saw this happen 2 or 3 other times with big financial changes. This is one of the rare moments where it's been so dramatic, so obvious that the focus here was on the adults in the system, a legitimate point and a very reasonable point. If you think that we had risk of hiring talented people in high-cost areas, that's a legitimate model. I just want to make clear, though, that it's not a model that said, where are our highest poverty communities and how do we drive more dollars per student into those communities? That's not the work that the legislature did. And if we all understand that here, then we can start to heal the system a little bit with where we're going. If shoring up compensation was step 1, cool, I'm good with it. Step 2, 3, 4, and 5, it better be about student equity and access to equitable programs and services. And that's our shared future together. This is data, you're going to get this. It simply shows levies went down a lot, state dollars went up. It's by administrator classified. I'm not going to spend time on it. You're going to get this. You're going to pore over it. You're going to meet with me. You're going to say, I don't get it, or I hate it, or don't show this to me again. That's cool too. So lots of increases in salary. Supplemental pay from levies went down 50%. The state kicked in a lot more money, so they were able to move this entire system. But I will tell you that there's risk out there. And this is what we all have to watch for in our role as the glue between districts and the legislature. Districts say things aren't solved yet, and we say we agree. And legislature says we pretty much solved it. Court said we're cool. And we say pretty stable environment. It's gonna mellow out a little bit. But if another recession comes along, the risk is even bigger today than it was 4 or 5 years ago or 9 or 10 years ago. Now you have a state spending 53% of its budget on K-12 and not 45%. Now you have a state tapping into significantly more sales tax and B&O tax. They're consumption taxes. This is what our state does. So you have more demand now for lots of people in the economy to be buying stuff. And if that slows down, the risk to keeping the basic ed investments intact gets even greater than it was a few years ago. So this is just a visualization, and it's one I've spent a lot of my career looking at. And as a legislator, I'm proud to tell you I lived in this little zone right here. This was me. This was Dave Maston's work right here. This is Dave's work. This was me. Our state has gone through big transformation like most states in the country. We used to buy stuff. Remember when you went to the record store, you bought your 45 or your 33 or maybe your 8-track or your cassette. Some of you bought the CD. Some of you bought other things. You bought stuff and it was taxed. When you shift from a stuff economy to a service economy, lots of that either isn't taxed or it wasn't for a very long time. So the shift from goods to services is a very different tax model, and we don't tax it the same way. Many of you used to buy something physically, and now you're clicking, and it's being sent to you. And until very recently, none of coming into the state was really taxed it the same way. So 60% of all transactions in this state used to be taxable, and now we're down to 37, 38% of all transactions. The entire way we fund education has changed. And it depends deeply now on a sustainable economy. So the risk to us is, what will we do in the next recession when the legislature can't afford these investments? How committed will we be to pushing our districts and challenging them to focus on students who need the most support? What will we do to transform federal dollars or grant dollars or program dollars? How will we rethink the work so that we are always on the cutting edge of delivering better outcomes for kids, even if the legislature struggles to sustain it? And I don't think we're going negative. I'll be clear about that. I just think it's hard to commit to $6-7 billion more dollars and then say we're going to promise every year to throw 2 and 3% inflation on all those dollars. That will be hard to sustain in the next recession. But we're not there yet, thankfully, so we have great opportunity now. So this is awesome. As a result of this state system, we're at 81% plus graduation rates. That's a 4-year number. That jumps a couple points if we look at 5-year. Because of your work, we're now going to be looking at 6-year and 7-year numbers because remember, kids are on a continuum, as our districts, as our people, as our lives, as our who we are. If we added our community and technical college partners and their high school completion programs and their open door programs in partnership with us and our GED programs, which do add value, if we look at what they do, we get about 90% of all of Washington's students to eventually get a high school equivalency or greater in this state. It's a tremendous story not told because everyone takes a snapshot of the 4-year. And remember, we were one of the last states clinging to a high-stakes test. We had one of the only 24-credit diplomas in the entire country. We had the highest bar in the nation, and we were growing, and we're going to keep growing. And we've caught the national average, basically, and now we're going to blow past it in the next couple of years because we're going to open up doors. Graduation rate for all the student groups that we have been focusing on are growing faster than the state average. Now, again, that's about growth. That is a good story. You've all made that your work, and it's powerful. But if we looked at the raw numbers of our Native youth, for example, or students with multiple barriers, I'm African American and I'm low income and I'm in a particular community, that grad rate can look awfully low. Even if the aggregate is improving faster than the state average, we have pockets out there that need a lot of additional supports. So our work is only just beginning. Number 6 in the nation and number 7 in the nation, respectively, in math and ELA scores. My team who meets with me regularly and Deb Kame's team who meets with me will tell you I don't care about any other assessment in the country. I don't really care about most assessments, quite frankly. But there's only one that is measured equally. It's a third-party administered system. It's a sampling methodology. Every state is a part of it. It gives you meaningful data from Texas to Florida to Massachusetts to Washington. It's the NAEP process, National Assessment of Educational Progress. We are top 10 in the United States in our ability to get students to meet those benchmarks in the 8th grade assessment for math and ELA. It's a great story untold because we picked Smarter Balance, which is good. It measures our standards effectively. But how do you compare our Smarter Balance score to Texas's homegrown score on a test they've invented or Kentucky's score on a test that they've created for themselves? We have states that look like every student does amazing. And then when they benchmark those homegrown state tests to the NAEP scores, for example, 30-point difference in Texas between what they say their students perform at compared to where they mark themselves against the rest of the country. So I'm really proud of the work that you all have done. For those of you who have been in this agency for any length of time, you've seen the assessment wars come and go. What has not changed through all of that is your commitment to developing our professionals and districts to focus on standards and learning. Because no matter what assessment we throw at them and no matter how it changes, we see constant improvement in our students. And you've helped create that. A couple more things on this piece of it. Credits are up, probably because you have a 24-credit diploma. A bunch of districts have freaked out, like, I need a 7-period day. I need an 8-period day. Do I have a 28-period day? Anyone? How do I get more credits in my system? But credits are up. Our SAT scores are up and the participation is up, and that's a hard thing to do. Typically, when you test lots more students, you get into income demographics of students who have faced many, many barriers, and a lot of states see their scores sink a little bit as they test more students. We've seen more students assessed and the scores going up. And our walk-in scores, a very powerful part of what we're going to remain committed to. I know there's controversy out there, but every one of you who touches the early learning work, the pre-K work, the kindergarten work, the early grade work, this is the system's pretest. We get to measure when students come into our amazing K-12 public schools, how are they doing? There are 6 frameworks that we sort of look at. We know whether students are meeting benchmark, if you will, on 6 of them or 5 of them or 4 of them or less. And we've seen student growth from 37% to 46% for those meeting 6 out of 6. And that number would go up if it was 5 out of 6 or 4 out of 6. It isn't about judgment. It isn't about placing them. It isn't about labeling students. It's about knowing what we're up against. And I will be the first person to talk to every media outlet and say to them, this K-12 system outperforms the underlying discrimination in our economy. Because less than half of our students come to us prepared on all those domains. But we get 81% of them to graduate on time, 84, 85% in 5 years, 90% of them if we partner with the community and technical colleges. We see students do exceedingly well in our system relative to where they start because of growing income inequality. And then we need only look at the adult statistics to see how the banking institutions, housing institutions, finance institutions, once again return to that inability to focus on equity. And we see those folks with great opportunity leave us again and face additional barriers. We have work to do, no question about it. But until I take my last breath, I will defend the role of public education as the great equalizer in our democracy, because we outperform equity compared to the overall economy. And I make this a point with business leaders. I make it a point with education leaders everywhere. Your greatest investment is still your public schools for transforming the lives of young people who face barriers, who want opportunity. And that is the work that we do. So here's where we're going. If the last 20 years have been defined by standards-based focus, and it's been defined by a lot of content, as we've really understood the powerful role that English language learning makes, or mathematics, or increasingly science. Many of these things are foundational, and I really believe in them, and many of them, quite candidly, I think are trendy. If you have big voice in this state and you are a large corporation with a lot of money, you just so happen to tell the world that the state is desperate for the thing you need in your business. So it is not surprising we've spent 20 years saying it's all about nurses and coding and all these other things, which is great. We do need those things. But you tell me, with your disposable income, if you volunteer to go see a nurse or go watch live entertainers in your community adding value, cultural value. We need artists and musicians and school teachers and vet techs. And we need people who drive buses, and we need people who fly planes. And we need all kinds of people in the economy. And so our opportunity here is to say, what are the barriers of students achieving their individual passion and dreams, instead of trying to put them in a mold and stamp them into the definition of what adults think they ought to be. And when you do that, you say the barriers to students aren't necessarily math and ELA, although that's a component. I'll bet it's food. I'll bet it's shelter. I'll bet it's protecting them from a really tough environment where they're seeing violence every day or sexual abuse. I'll bet it's a growing mental health crisis as the biggest risk to our students being in love with school, not the lack of a teacher who's excited about fractions. So we have work to do, and I need us to think differently about the work. And many of you have been doing it from a personal experience and from a professional experience. But we're going to start tilting the agenda of the state of Washington away from STEM, which is key, but STEM doesn't save a kid from being abused or who's at risk of suicide. Truly intervening at early ages and making meaningful connections so that we can support a kid's mental health or the things they need in Maslow's hierarchy and those base levels. That's the difference between them getting stabilized and then loving school or coming to school excited or wanting to play in a marimba band. So we're going to think a lot more about support services in the coming years. Our budget requests will reflect it. You will not see multi-billion-dollar salary requests coming from OSPI. You will not see multi-million-dollar requests for more math and science likely, although that can be a component of it where we see weakness. We will put our biggest political capital around support services. And we will empower our school districts to think about what that means from the lens they live in to their community connections. And we're going to grow legislators through the political process and through the policy-making process into an understanding that their best return on investment is a healthy and safe child who's excited to learn. That's our future together. That's what we're going to do. So we've got to maintain our investment levels. We need the legislature to maintain their commitment to basic ed, and hopefully they will do that. We're going to continue to build out pathways. 1599 is a remarkable bill. We've been working on it for 2.5 years in some form or another. We basically got it done this year. We took the lead on this. We said that value for a student is a next step, not an artificial benchmark. Opening up pathways. Yeah, you can demonstrate proficiency through an assessment. That's awesome. And I hope you head to the UW, or I hope you head to South Puget Sound Community College. But if you're headed to work, we value that too. And if you're headed to an apprenticeship, we value that too. And if you're headed to the military, we really value that. Every pathway is a celebration and an opportunity. So pathway work, in addition to those support services, is the policy of our future here. And the duals. I'm not going to lose any momentum on this. I'll continue to tell you that dual credit is an economic essential for us. It isn't just about test scores on AP or IB or the stuff that Barb has committed her life to. Those are really critical things. It's bigger than that. It's $1.5 trillion in student loan debt nationally right now. $26 billion in student loan debt in Washington state. It's defaulting at between 10 and 12% right now. There's an entire generation of young people so far in debt that home purchasing just seems impossible. Or going back to grad school seems very difficult. They're delaying childhood. Like, without fifth graders, we wouldn't have fifth graders. Like, there's nothing more fundamental than people who are excited to start a family. Like, that's like societal basics, that in 80s music. So we have to have young people feel like the world is their oyster again, and they are so strapped with student loan debt that it is almost impossible. Add up all the debt in the United States of credit cards and car payments, add it all up, still doesn't equal student loan debt right now. It is a crisis not unlike the climate crisis, which I also think is real. It can wipe out an entire generation. We have a role in that. I want every student capable of doing college-level work when they're in high school to get it, and I don't want them to pay a damn dime for it in the future. Okay, that's what it looks like. If I am a basic ed student and I am advancing, why would you charge me money because I'm advancing? Why would that suddenly become a private responsibility of me as a student when I can access college and high school or AP or Running Start or any of the rest of them? If I'm a basic ed student first, and we entitle every basic ed student according to our Constitution their basic ed, it shouldn't matter if I'm really struggling in biology and need the support or I'm really advancing in calculus and want to excel. So we're going to relieve families. We're going to take a leadership role in this. We just got a proviso that said, take a look at this, start talking to the legislature about what that takes. It's going to be really uncomfortable for our districts because part of it is they're at record levels of investment now from the state, and the state's not going to put another $1 billion in for this or $500 million. Part of their answer is going to be, you have a lot of additional resources. Tell us again why you're charging students $325 to take a biology class that they could have taken next door for nothing? So higher ed's going to struggle with this because guess what? When you send 25,000 students a year to colleges and some of them struggle, we want a phone call. We want to know from the college or the university that the student's struggling so we can create those meaningful interventions. You can't just go silent on us and then come graduation time say, sorry, student just really struggled in that English class. I guess they don't get the credit and they don't graduate on time and grandparents book trips here from Iowa. People still live in Iowa. I don't get it either. My son tells me that Iowa and Wyoming are a myth. They're not real. I say, son, they're right here on the map. He says, myth. It's all theory. So I'm taking it to Wyoming eventually, I guess. So dual credit is a big darn deal. A lot of you touched it in many different ways. I'm very serious about this. It will be uncomfortable for districts, but it's not just about like one more thing we do. It's about $28 billion in debt in this state. And if we can get students even 15 credits or 45 credits, or the student getting 45, get them to 90. Like every single time we save them a year's worth of college, we save them $10,000 to $20,000. It is life-changing if we can intervene in this system with the $15 billion a year that we invest today. And finally, dual language. I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. There's no purpose in an education system that doesn't prepare every student for the opportunity to compete anywhere they want in the world. Because the rest of the country figured that out a long time ago. But our English only is the most arrogant educational approach we've had. It tells young people, particularly who speak Spanish, that they're in deficit until they learn English. And we even starve them of core content sometimes until they learn English. And then we say, good, now you can start learning math and science along with everybody else, but now you're years behind. I can't believe it's being revealed in the assessment scores that our English language learners are struggling in math and science and ELA. How'd that happen? And then in middle school, we say, we don't care about language. Here's a backpack. It weighs 80 pounds, by the way. Run around for 7 periods a day. Good luck with your hormones. We'll see you in 9th grade. And then they show up in 9th grade, and the backpack only gets a little lighter because by then they're like, I'm not eating lunch. I'm too cool for lunch. And some teacher says, why are you not taking Spanish? Every student should learn a second language. And the students shake their head and say, what? I was told in elementary school that everyone needed to learn English, and by middle school, you didn't care about anything except me keep my hands off people. And now you want me to think globally so that I can compete in the world? I can work in Brazil, I can work in Tokyo, I can work in Berlin, I can work in Moscow or Madrid? And the answer is yes. This country is starving for talent here, and we're bringing it in from around the world. Capital is mobile, and people are mobile, and opportunity is mobile. But the message to our students is stick around in the United States. We'll be on top of the world forever. Don't worry about thinking about other cultures. Don't worry about thinking about other language. It's not sustainable, friends. So I'm not going to let this go. This is a long haul. This is a 20-year kind of vision. But I'm deeply, deeply committed to every single student in this state eventually going to kindergarten where they will learn, if not already, be underway in second language learning. Every student needs to graduate in the state of Washington with at least 2 languages that they command. That is a global opportunity for every single kid. That is equity in the culture that it shares. The embrace that it makes of our immigrant families. The ability to lift ourselves off of our myopic American perspective and say, what does the rest of the world think and do, and how do they operate, and what are their economic systems? The content you can put about global learning and language acquisition is remarkable. And I'll be the first to admit to you that I took 3 years of German. I didn't take it seriously enough. I was told I needed to basically do it to go to college. I went to the greatest university in the world, Washington State University. I'm pretty sure that was a woohoo by everybody. But then I didn't take it again. So now I'm side by side with my daughter on Duolingo trying to relearn my German right now. The language people are like, oh God, why did he do that? It's not the greatest software in the world, but it's bringing the vocabulary back to me. And she's teaching herself right now Spanish because she doesn't have that opportunity yet in middle school, so she's more prepared in high school because her parents are saying to her, like, you will have language command. So it's pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome where we're going together. I just talked about all this, so we're not going to get to conclusions. We can take questions, but I'm going to close with this. You've heard me say it before, and it's hard, but change is not something that you observe, overcome, and then take a pause about. Change is something that we, as an organization, just accept as part of our work. People come and go. 4 amazing retirements. 12 new people coming in. Other people will take opportunities. Our organizational units will have to change as we focus on these other things. Resources will come and go. Districts will flare up sometimes. The needs of students, stuff we couldn't imagine they're struggling with, will emerge in 5 and 10 years. And we will conquer and we will be successful on things that we attempted to have success on just years ago. But I'm challenging all of you to be uber flexible. Be that organization that just accepts that change is going to happen. Get comfortable with it all the time, right? Get comfortable with it. And my observation, for what it's worth to you, is the only thing that holds us together through change that is difficult, personnel changes and conflict in our units or different resources or different legislative models. The only thing that holds us together is taking enough risk with our personal selves that we make a connection with our coworkers, that we truly care about their success, that we ask them how they're doing, that we pull them aside and say, between you and I just want to tell you what I observed. Taking that relationship trust to another level for all of you, I really want to challenge you to do that. Almost all of you went through the implicit bias training. Many of you are really deep in that journey, and some of you are just taking that first step. But I'm going to challenge you to keep thinking about that from a racial equity lens, from a gender lens, from a poverty lens. Not always easy to see, but a lot of us are dealing with trauma from our youth that carries into our workplace. And if you only knew the why, you would understand why we react. And it's not excusable every time. Sometimes we got to clean our stuff up. But being remarkably sensitive to the transformation that we were all on as individuals, that's what's going to sustain us through change, because we got each other's back. We trust each other. In the 2.5 years I've been here, we've had births in this agency, amazing celebrations. We've lost parents. We've lost children in this agency. There's nothing more important to you than your families and your faith. I believe that. And when we give each other the grace of those moments, and we see it as the person needing to overcome or working through something, and we don't personalize it, we get to make remarkable connections that sustain us through change and challenge and celebration. So keep finding your humanity. Keep living your practice of your own journey, but know that your neighbor next to you is on their journey as well. And together we make amazing things happen when we are the glue that connects our districts to our check writers. Let's double the budget in the next 7 years. I'm kidding, that's not going to happen again. But let's do transform, let's take risk. You may have questions. I am grateful for your time in this hot auditorium. I don't know that we'll ever get air conditioning, but hey, it's not the 4th floor of our building, so there's that. Okay. Thank you for being here, by the way. You will get this sent to you. A round of applause to yourselves for being patient.